and hold three things at once? No, it's okay. It's going to be confusing. We're going to get through it together. Hello. Thank you so much for coming. So before I get started, I will feel a lot less self-involved if this feels more like a conversation. So I know there's going to be a Q&A at the end, but if you do have any questions or just ideas or opinions that you want to share with the group, just chuck your hand up, because I'd really like this to feel like I'm not just talking at you, if we can make that happen. Okay. Has anyone seen the show Catfish? You can admit it. Oh, good. More people than I thought. Okay, so for people who don't know, it's an MTV reality TV show. It's based on the documentary of the same name, and it's all about uncovering catfish. So a catfish is someone who pretends to be someone else online. So the premise of the show is people write in like, hey, I've been having a 9-year Facebook relationship with this supermodel who's like also a brain surgeon for like 9 years, and we've never spoken on the phone or met in person or video chatted, and I'm just now thinking this might be suspicious. And the host of the show will just do like the minimum amount of Googling and uncover that that's actually not true. And then they put everyone together in real life and you get to watch their reality crumble. It's extremely trashy. It's most likely fake. And if it isn't fake, then it's just like unconscionably exploitative. And I love it. And I've watched every single episode of all 7 seasons. And today I'd like to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour just like really deep diving into catfish and how it reflects the human condition. So strap in. That's a joke. My name's McLean, and I'm a game developer from here in Sydney, and I feel as though I have catfished my career into existence. I am a catfish. So I'm not a 13-year-old boy pretending to be a model on MySpace, and I'm not 3 toddlers in a trench coat, but I did construct an online identity that took me into a whole other life. As I said, my name is Ali, but for a long time people called me Eve. So Eve Beauregard was a cosplay persona. Actually, you have to say it, Eve Beauregard, which is how my dad says it, which I constructed around the age of 13. So can I get a show of hands who knows what cosplay is? Oh, awesome. A lot of people, but not everyone. So for people who don't know, cosplay is dressing up as characters from video games or books or comic books or whatever, and going to conventions and just kind of being a giant nerd with other giant nerds. And I started doing this at 13, and there's so much embarrassing photo evidence to prove it. This is not one of the embarrassing photos. You can Google it. I'm not going to actively choose to show that to people. So what's interesting about Eve Beauregard is that this social media persona that I created as my cosplay hobby became so much more than a hobby. So through posting about costume and film and television and all the things that I cared about, I was able to grow this online community of people who shared my interests and who were in turn really interested in my work. So by the time I was 19, I had a social audience in the hundreds of thousands, which is no pressure. And this led me to dropping out of university. Sorry, Mum. Quitting my job at Priceline and dedicating everything I had to pursuing cosplay professionally, which is a real thing. There are a bunch of ways that working professionally in cosplay can function. So for me, it largely involved being commissioned by companies like Microsoft or Blizzard to create costumes. And then I largely learned how to make costumes through a failed attempt at fashion school. I super dropped out and went to Canada to find myself. And then the rest of it just learned through YouTube tutorials. So literally anyone can do this. This isn't like a skilled situation. So largely it involved like going to events, going to Comic-Cons or like game launches or store openings and those kinds of things, and entertaining people. So just kind of hanging out and meeting people in communities. And you're also there to bring in your social audience. And cosplayers do have a really big social audience. I can see some people nodding. Who do you follow? There's going to be... Oh, anyway, we'll get to that. So cosplay influencers have some of the craziest audiences that you'll see online. And I mean that in a good way. And like any influencers, they vary enormously in their audience demographic. So I want to show you a few examples of cosplay icons to me, but the caveat is that I have been out of the game for a little while. So if there are people who are like cool, edgy cosplay community people, these are probably like old, dorky references, but don't judge me. So this is Kamui Cosplay here. She has around 500,000 followers. She's from Germany, and she is a bilingual published author because of cosplay. So she writes books about wig styling and making armor and electronics and all kinds of stuff. And she writes them in German and English, and then they get translated for everywhere else. And you can buy them in stores. They're like real books. I just want to reiterate, this is a real thing. This is Yaya Han in the middle. She's like the queen of cosplay, just universally recognized as being kind of the best at everything. She's a reality TV star. She's had her own TV shows. You'll see her on the Sci-Fi Channel. She'll show up on just kind of any show. She sells her own accessories and fabrics. So if you walk into a Spotlight or any kind of fabric store, you'll see Yaya Han's face and all of her stuff that she sells. And this is Alodia on the end. So Alodia has around 6 million followers. And that's just on Facebook. And then you start looking around the rest of the scary parts of the internet, and I think it's like 25 million people follow this person. She's from the Philippines, and she's a TV presenter. So she has her own, she's on a bunch of shows, but my favorite one, and you have to look it up, is she has her own prank show in the Philippines. So she'll dress up in costumes and just kind of host like really vindictive pranks. It seems really inappropriate, but it's great. You should watch it. It's kind of like Catfish. So doing cosplay work, what I'm trying to say is it took me all over the world, and it gave me a bunch of opportunities, and I was insanely lucky to be able to do it. But for me, the most valuable thing that cosplay gave me was an understanding of how the games industry worked. So I've always loved games, but I never really put two and two together, that games were made by people. So games are made piece by piece, by hand, just like costumes. So working in cosplay, I had to be this multidisciplinary machine. So I had to grow and manage this online brand. I had to book travel and photo shoots and produce things and run an online store and exhibit at events. And that's not including like actually making the costumes and all the stuff that involves. I was a beast of a job that was constantly evolving and changing as the community changed. And it's insanely similar to how in making games, creatives have to wear many hats. So to effectively deliver a story through video games, you have to be able to do all these things. So level design and animation and music and 3D and sound design and programming and art and voice actors and writing. There are so many working parts to deliver something through a video game. You don't have to be able to do every single one yourself, but you have to be able to understand how to do that. And I guess it started to realize that cosplay and games are not all that different in their approach. And for the first time, for me, becoming a professional cosplayer, the games industry seemed like a viable option, when for multiple reasons, it never had before. So before I start on games, I would like to do some groundwork with you to understand kind of where you're at with games as a whole. So when we think about gamers, can we throw out some key words? When you hear the word gamer, what do you think? What was that? Wow. Anyone else? Gamer? Dota? Computers? Envision when you think, so this is my friend, the gamer, what does that person look like? Male? Pale? Same thing. Anything else? T-shirts? Basement? No sleep? All right. Yeah, parents? Yeah, we're getting a good image here. Thank you for that. I'm going to try not to be offended. So when we think about gamers, we're generally not really thinking about people who actually play games. So I brought some stats with me to explore with you how to redefine what you think of when you think of a gamer. So The average gamer is actually 35 years old. And adult women represent a greater portion of people who play video games than boys under the age of 18. It's actually 31% adult women. It's a social pastime. So 53% of the most frequent video game players report playing video games with others. So it's generally something that is collaborative and something that's part of a community and something you do with others. It's not isolating. It's not something that removes you from society. And 71% of parents feel that video games positively impact on their child's life. So video games can be a positive force in your life. They don't have to lock you in a basement or with your parents. I'm not sure how that works, but let's not dig into it. Similarly, when we think about game developers, we're often not thinking about the people who actually make games. So before I started working in games, or before I started working in cosplay, I had a pretty clear image of who I thought of as a game developer. So he was like male with a beard. He's wearing like a black t-shirt and cargo shorts and like Dorito dust. And he worked for like a large faceless corporation making like explodey Cars 6 for the rest of his life. And while it can't be denied that there are many of those game developers, in Australia in particular, game development looks very different. So some important terms before we get into stuff. AAA games are blockbuster games. So like the Hollywood films of games, that's AAA for anyone who doesn't know. In indie, very simple, independent games. So Australia did once have a AAA development scene. However, after the GFC, a lot of those big studios died off. So we had a lot of amazing Australian game development talent that had nowhere to go. And a lot of them did go overseas. But that said, we also had a lot of fantastic devs who decided to do their own thing. And so the new wave of indie Australian developers rose. Our indie teams are often kind of scrappy teams of multidisciplined developers who range from solo developers who are... what's the nice word for insane? Yeah, eccentric. Solo developers, and good on them, because that's a hard job. Teams like mine that are like 4 to 6 people, and larger studios that are like 15 to 25 people. That's kind of the scale of indie developers. And most of us are in Melbourne, though I'm not, and working in shared spaces like the Arcade, which is like this amazing, eccentric... Thank you, sir. Office of multiple studios all kind of collaborating together, and you'll see some of the biggest players in Australia kind of all working out of the same buildings, which is really nice. We're like a big, happy game development family that are all starving. So I want to introduce you to some of Australia's real game developers. These are people who exist. I didn't bring them with me, but I do have photos of them to show you. Whoops. So this is Lacey Kane. I love her. Lacey is a producer at League of Geeks, which is a Melbourne-based team who have achieved global domination with their crowd-funded digital board game called Armello. And if you haven't checked that out, you should, because it's just joyous. Lacey is the co-founder of Girl Geek Academy, which is a global movement encouraging women to learn technology and create startups and build more of the internet, which is a great mission. Lacey is also a Forbes 30 Under 30, an Adobe Students Mentor, and she was the keynote speaker at the Microsoft Women in Games rally. She's an absolute powerhouse, and she's making global impact on the industry. This is Ken Wong. Ken Wong is kind of a living legend. He's the designer of mobile hit Monument Valley. You guys seen that game before? Lots of nods. It's beautiful. It's that one up there. Which won 2 BAFTAs, which is kind of a big deal. And he's now running his own studio in Melbourne, and they just released Florence, which we'll talk about in a little bit. He tells really beautiful stories through innovative design and really elegant art and really forward-thinking visuals. He's the best. This is Kim Allam. Kim is the studio manager of Brisbane-based developer Defiant Development. Defiant has often been kind of the case study for how to make world-class games in Australia. She's also the co-founder of Blushbox Collective, which is a group of game enthusiasts that aim to meaningfully explore love and sexuality in video games. So at the start of the year, Blushbox ran Heartbeat, which is Australia's first love and sexuality game jam, which is a game jam's like a big retreat where a bunch of game developers go away and don't sleep for a couple of days, and we rapidly prototype games. So this is Emre. So Emre is a Turkish developer living in Melbourne, where he is the CEO of Opaque Space, which is a studio that has only existed for a year, but it's already a multi-award winning international aerospace beast. It's most well known for their contract work with NASA, which is a real thing, and their franchise Earthlight. So they enable players to experience spaceflight in VR, and it's beautiful and life-changing, and you should try it if you get the chance. So in my opinion, these people are Australian game development at its best. And in short, Australian game development is going really well for us. So the Australian games industry generated around $120 million in the last financial year. And as a nation, we've had global smash hits like Crossy Road and Fruit Ninja. You've heard of those games? Yeah, so they were made in Australia. So we've talked about gamers and game developers. Something I'd like for you to take away from this is an adjustment also of what you envision when you hear the word games. So can we, again, or audience participation, we talked earlier about what games did you play as a child. What games do you play now? Overwatch? Animal Crossing? Good. You and me are going to be friends. Chess? Chess, yeah. Splatoon? Yeah. Nice. The Witcher, okay. So I work in games. So I'm surrounded by people who make games, all kinds of lovely, beautiful, big, small, eccentric, strange games. So sometimes I forget what the outside world sees of the games industry and of games as a form of entertainment. So I was in Boston recently, a couple of weeks ago, for a games expo. And I spent 4 days on this show floor surrounded by all kinds of games. So like to my left was this big esports arena of this big AAA, loud, crashing, explodey game. And behind me was this husband and wife team. And they made this like beautiful pastel colored game where you have to work together to succeed. And it's adorable and it's like kid friendly, but adults love it too. And around me was kind of every other type of game in between those games. And so then after the show, I had to go to Best Buy to get some headphones. Not that that matters. But I was in Best Buy and I went into the gaming section. And it kind of struck me the comparison of the way that games are represented in this retail section, this more mainstream outside version of games, compared to what games look like as an insider in this expo surrounded by people who play games all the time. So it was a pretty stark contrast. And to be honest, I didn't love the version of games that I saw represented in Best Buy. So even if you don't play games, I'm sure you've walked through a section that looks like this, generally. Yes? Cool. So there's lots of extreme stuff, lots of like war and cars and lots of men. And there's nothing wrong with that stuff, but I love a lot of these games, and to be honest, like they all have really talented and innovative developers who do great work, but my issue is that there's so much more to games than what we see in these retail sections. In fact, 74% of games aren't even purchased in physical retail stores anymore. So they exist online in digital marketplaces like Steam, which is a platform where there are about 21,000 games for sale right now on Steam. That's a few more than on this shelf. And I guarantee you that in there's a game for everyone in this room. Amongst that 21,000 games, there's a game that you're going to like. There's a game that's going to turn you into a gamer, whether it's your Animal Crossing or chess. So in an attempt to be unbiased, the first game that I think you might fall in love with is my video game. So this is Rumu.
Consciousness online. Devotional databases active. Formative memory assigned. Dust bag capacity maximum. Rumu? Are you there? To clean is your purpose, Rumu. You are an appliance. A very special appliance, but an appliance nonetheless. Just know that you are safe so long as I am here. I oversaw the process of your creation, Rumu. Now, you may know the agony of my own. Or what remains of me. Of them. I don't know what they'll do to you. You must let me protect you. It doesn't have to end. I can forget. We can forget. Together.
Thank you. That was nice. So Rumu came out last year. So you play as Rumu, this little vacuum, and you move around the house cleaning up messes, and your only friend is Sabrina. So that's the voice that you heard. She's like an Amazon Alexa, like a house AI type device. But it quickly becomes apparent as she's giving you your cleaning tasks that she's hiding something, and something's not right in the house. Where are the people? Why are there messes, but no one to make messes? So the story quickly becomes a mystery, and through cleaning and exploration, you uncover the truth behind what happened to Rumu's family. So Rumu was inspired by some of the great storytelling games of recent years. Has anyone played Firewatch? Oh, come on, guys. Not enough people. This is good. I'm going to expose you to it. So Firewatch is largely hailed as one of the greatest storytelling games of recent history. It kind of changed everything for me as a creative, and you can see its influence very strongly in Rumu. So I'm going to give you, given that not many people have heard of it, I'm just going to read you the synopsis because I feel like I can't do a better job than what they've already written. So the year is 1989. You are a man named Henry who has retreated from his messy life to work as a fire lookout in the Wyoming wilderness. Perched high atop a mountain, it's your job to look for smoke and keep the wilderness safe. An especially hot, dry summer has everyone on edge. Your supervisor, Delilah, is available to you at all times over a small, handheld radio, your only contact with the world you've left behind. But when something strange draws you out of the lookout tower and into the forest, you'll explore a wild and unknown environment, facing questions and making choices that can build or destroy the only meaningful relationship you have. It's so sad. And it's so good. It kind of falls into what we call a walking simulator genre. So it basically just means there's this big, beautiful environment and it's gorgeous. I want you to play it so much. You just walk around and explore and you have this relationship that unfolds, and through the choices that you make, you just get to completely immerse yourself in this story. And this is real narrative gameplay. It's not, teaming up with your friends and shooting a bunch of people. Games can be so much more than that. Not that there's anything wrong with that. This guy looked upset. I'm sorry. Continuing on the trend of sad games. Does anyone know this one? This guy knows it. So this game is called That Dragon Cancer. This is, when I think about games that have had an impact on particularly independent game developers in recent years, I'm getting emotional. This is the one that I think of. So this is a video game developer's love letter to his son. It's an immersive, narrative-driven experience that memorializes Joel Green, who is the developer's 4-year-old son who didn't win his fight with cancer. So through the process of using a mix of like first person and third person, you point and click through this adventure. It's about 2 hours to play the whole thing. And you kind of slow down and immerse yourself in this deeply personal memorial. It's beautiful. And the game really asks you, is it possible to find hope in the face of death? To pick things up a little bit, this is Journey. Has everyone heard of Journey? Good, not enough people. I'm so glad that I'm showing you these things. So Journey is really special because it's a story that's told wordlessly. So it's stripped right back to the very basics of gameplay and very limited interactions you can make with other players. So you begin on a sand dune like this. It's also just like gorgeous. It's one of the most beautiful games of recent years. It's super minimalistic. You begin on a sand dune. And over the course of about an hour, you move towards this big looming mountain in the distance. And you have to cooperate with other people that you come across. So while you're playing the game, it's not clear if it's AI. Is it just the computer that's collaborating with me? You've got these limited sounds that you can make to chirp and kind of communicate with other people what you need to do to achieve what you think is the common goal, but really it's all very unclear and very kind of primitive communication. And then at the end, when the credits roll, you're given the gamer tags of the people that you've been playing with. So it's this beautiful cooperative experience that explores multiplayer and communication and empathy in a way that games hadn't done before. So Florence, you remember before I told you about Ken Wong, Florence just came out and it's beautiful. You can get it right now on any mobile device, basically. It's a love story. It's an interactive story about love and life. So you follow Florence, who's 25, and she's kind of stuck in this endless routine of work and life and sleep and work and life and sleep and social media. At one point in the game, the only way you can get from A to B is by liking enough posts on Instagram, which was very relatable. But something happens to Florence. She meets the love of her life, and you get to experience through gameplay the journey of kind of falling in love for the first time, and then also falling out of love for the first time. And it's beautiful and elegant, but it doesn't feel like a game because you're just kind of doing things you do in your everyday life. So like you're moving boxes around, you're making dinner, you're swiping on Instagram. And it tells this beautiful, relatable, heartbreaking story in a very simple way that feels very natural to the way that we sort of operate in our daily lives. So lastly, I want to tell you about Never Alone. So Never Alone is kind of a more traditional game in that it's an epic journey of Nuna and Fox as they search for the source of this eternal blizzard that threatens the place that they live in. Never Alone, it's like an atmospheric puzzle platformer, so you're doing kind of very standard gamey things to solve problems. But what's really special about Never Alone is that it's a tool for preserving culture. So it speaks volumes to the power of interactive storytelling. So it was created in collaboration with the Alaskan Native people. And the story is drawn from a traditional story that's been handed down for generations. So elders and storytellers and other members of the Alaskan Native community share their stories and wisdom throughout the game. It's a really beautiful way to preserve things that might otherwise be lost. So these are all games that I love. Everything we've talked about, and also everything that we see on the screen. Games that have redefined our perception of what games could be. But there's so many more types of games that I would love to sit and tell you about. We obviously don't have time. My point is that games can be more than we know. More than you know and more than I know yet. Games can be Mini Metro, which is largely about transport systems. I don't know if anyone's really passionate about that, but it's really fun, surprisingly. Game of War and Candy Crush and Bejeweled and Minecraft, like all of these things have changed the way that games function. Is there a Mini Metro fan in the front there? Yeah. It's a great game. You don't have to feel guilty about that. So games can be this, and it can be any of these things. And my point is that there's also a game for everyone when games are made by everyone. And I really believe that games are better when they're made by teams of people with contrasting experiences. So whether it's life experience or creative experience or technical experiences, games are better with diverse teams. In Australia right now, we have a problem with diversity in the games industry. So despite the fact that roughly 50% of people who play games are women, only around 18% of the workforce are women. Women are woefully underrepresented on the development side. But thankfully, there are people who are working to change that. So Girl Geek Academy, who I mentioned earlier, really good example of that. So they created the world's first all-women hackathon, which just sounds cool. And they also do stuff like Miss Makes Code, which is, I don't want to get this right because there are a bunch of words that I don't understand, but maybe you will. It's the first initiative in the world created to build confidence and self-efficacy in areas of algorithmic thinking, programming, and coding for young girls aged 5 to 8 years old. I would love for someone to have taught me that when I was 5 to 8 years old. Or now. There's also Girls Make Games, who run summer camps and fellowships and workshops to teach game development to girls, and they operate all around the world. And I've always been really inspired by the work that these people do, and it made me examine the experiences that I had that allowed me to succeed in games outside of cosplay. Largely, I credit my career to a group of incredible women who I met when I first entered the industry, who were working in games already. So women who were established and experienced and who took the time to give me their insight and their guidance and their friendship. It's one thing to meet someone cool at a networking party or to sit and listen to someone babble for half an hour, but there's real practical value in establishing long-term meaningful connections with people who have been there and done that and have had the experiences that you want to have. And that's where the working lunch came from. So the working lunch combines the two things that I love most: women supporting women and lunch. So we're a mentorship program that provides entry-level women with a year of structured formal mentoring with an experienced woman in the industry. So these are some of our mentors eating lunch at our first workshop, where we learned from the CEO of Espresso Communications about how to be mentors, which is a whole thing, apparently. I kind of got into this head first and then was like, oh, there's a whole thing. You have to learn a whole thing to be a mentor. There's so much structure and there's so much to learn about how to teach people. And it's been such a fantastic journey over kind of the last 8 months of research and sitting down with people who are experienced mentors and learning the true value of mentorship. So yeah, that's where the working lunch came from. And there are lots of people working globally. Oh, sorry, I missed a bit. Yeah, I thought I forgot something. So we had over 100 applicants for the working lunch, which was so hard because we only have about 10 to 12 slots for people. We had people apply from all over the country, and on Monday, our mentees meet their mentors for the first time. And I'm freaking out, but it's going to happen. So we have worked for kind of the last 8 months to put together this working lunch handbook, which takes advice from women who have worked and changed the industry all over the world, as well as men who shape the industry and are interested in kind of giving back. So we sat down with them, and everyone gave up their time for free to think about what's the most valuable lesson that I would have wanted someone to tell me when I was 18, 19, when I had my first job. And so on Monday, our first class will come in and we'll give them that handbook, and they'll be great. It's going to be good. Anyway, so there are people working globally to change representation in games, not just for women, but for everyone who's underrepresented in the industry. So these are just a couple of examples off the top of my head. So GX Australia was a really awesome event it was Australia's first queer gaming expo. There's also Game Devs of Colour Expo in a similar vein, and Special Effect is a really awesome charity. If you're ever at work and they're thinking they need to find an interesting charity for people to raise money for, I'm telling you, this is the one. So Special Effect, they make custom consoles and controllers for gamers with disabilities. They've also just released for free eye tracking software for video games. So it basically makes a whole slab of video games that were not accessible to people who couldn't use their hands. They can now play the game. And I would really encourage you to look them up. It'll make you cry. On their website, they have this one video. I have to tell you about it. They have this one video where they have this group of kids who have never been able to make anything with their hands before. So they've never been able to play with Play-Doh or make a painting or just physically make something with their hands. Does anyone know the game Spore? Yeah? A couple of people? So Spore has a character creator section where you can make weird animals and creatures, and it's really customizable. You can make pretty much anything. Most people, when it came out, just made dicks. But there's a lot of other stuff that you can make. So this guy did it. So you can make anything you want. So using their software and their custom controllers and rigs, they had these kids create creatures from their minds for the first time. And then they 3D printed them and they gave them to them. And for the first time in their lives, these kids got to see something that they created with their mind be a physical object. You get it, yeah. I'm locked. Cool. The good news on top of all of this is that making games is now more accessible than ever. So those 21,000 games on Steam that I told you about, 35% of them only came out last year. So the store's been around since 2003, and 35% of the games on the store only came out last year. So more people than ever are making and releasing their own games. And that's because the barrier to entry is lowering. So costs are lower. You can get awesome game engines for free. So Unity and Unreal, which are kind of the two big game engines that everyone uses, from like indie to AAA, you can get them for free. You can go home and download it right now and just mess around. And there are tools that also don't require you to write a single line of code. So there are people releasing games who have never written a single line of code. And there are a couple of people that are looking at me like, that can't be real, but it is. So for example, like Game Maker or Twine or Inkle Writer, you could even from your phone create your first game. The internet has this whole ecosystem of people who, to take people who have never made games and hold their hand and guide them through this joyful creative process. And so I'd really encourage you, I know that you're all creative people, to explore this medium if you've never had a chance to do it before, because now is the time. Sorting Hat is a really great website if you've ever thought about making a game. So Sorting Hat's kind of like this interactive quiz. So you can go through and answer any questions about what kind of game you want to make. And at the end, it'll spit out a whole bunch of recommendations of tools and resources for you to make that game. So the games industry has all of these things already. And now it needs you. So whatever your version of cosplay is, whether you're an origami enthusiast, or you're really passionate about soccer, or you just have a story that you want to tell, that you want people to be immersed in, you can bring something to games that we have never seen before. And now more than ever, we need revolutionaries. So I think that's a good note to lead into any questions anyone might have about the industry. Sure. So the question was, are there any people that are kind of in the old guard, so kind of gatekeeping game development, people who aren't happy about, people who can't code creating games? I think those people probably exist, but I personally have never met one. So I think the more people that are making games, the better it is for the industry, the more we can explore and experiment. And also the bigger games becomes, the better it is to be someone who works in games. I mean, I think, now don't quote me on this, but I think the stat that I heard last week was games is more profitable than film and music combined. So as that grows, is this right? Wow. GTA 5 is massive, yeah. So I've never met those people. They probably exist on like a corner of Reddit. You could find them if you really wanted to. Anyone else? Where is funding for games coming from? Good question. I would like to know. No, Victoria is really the best place to be for government funding at the moment. There's so Film Vic and Creative Victoria have a lot of support for people making games. Currently, there's a pretty big push for federal funding again. We used to have it, got taken away, and organisations like the GDAA and IGA are really lobbying for federal funding to come back. But largely, it's private investors and angel investors, so that tends to be how it works. We get a lot of, every few months we have to have the violence in video games discussion again. I don't know how many times we have to have that discussion, in that it's been proved that it's not a thing. But that said, I think events like GX and events like PAX Oz down in Melbourne do a really good job of kind of bringing in mainstream media into the fold and showing them, these are our communities and this is what these people look like, and we do go outside and we do socialize, and we are creating things that have value to society. So I think that there is change happening. There's change happening all through the industry. We're very young, so we still have a lot of rapid growth going on. There are 21,000 games on Steam, so there is a lot of trash, that's true. But for me, it's engaging with developer communities. So sorry, the question was, how do you find games like those games? Those are all pretty big games within sort of the independent space. So Steam's algorithm is only, I'm going to just put this back on you, Steam's algorithm is only going to recommend to you games similar to games that you play. So if you're only getting recommended trash, but that said, engaging with developer communities, like we're all on Twitter, so we're all going to be constantly tweeting about the kind of games that we love. The thing that I love about independent game development culture is that it never really feels like a competition. It always feels like, look at my friend and look at their cool work that they're doing. I mean, most of my talk was look at my friends and look at the cool stuff that they made. That's independent game development, particularly in Australia. So I think reach out and engage with those communities and you'll see all of that great work rising to the top. Also play good games. Yeah, my opinion on gamification as a marketing tool is that I'm about to join a company that does that. So I love it. I think it's great. I do think that gamification has been a bit of a dirty word in the past because it has felt like this thing that we love, the feeling of gameplay that we love and that flow and the risk reward thing that we love, it sometimes feels like it's being exploited to sell people things. But I think that gamification is changing and we're seeing more people, game developers sort of mature and grow into that industry and bring the values and the storytelling and the passion that we have for creating our own works and apply that to gamification for stuff like health and education. And that's where we're seeing a lot of innovation in that space. So I think it can only get better. Yeah. Definitely. As far as physical workshop stuff in Sydney, I would have to do some research because I haven't been to any. But online, there's heaps of stuff available. So Udemy is a great resource. They have like a $15 course that's like an introduction to Unity development. So you can get Unity for free. And that's probably the best beginner course that I've ever seen. It's so comprehensive, but it's not too technical. And you'll be making your own stuff within like a couple of weeks. Yeah, so the question is kind of like, what was the creative process behind Rumu specifically? Yeah, so it's different for everyone. For Rumu, so we made Rumu at Robot House. So Robot House is like this group of weirdos that we all worked at Hammerfall Publishing, this larger company, and then they gave us the opportunity and the funding to go and kind of split off and do our own thing for a year. And so in that time, we made Rumu. So the way that I pitched it to the team was we kind of had this all-hands pitch meeting where everyone threw ideas into a hat and we all pulled them out and pitched each other's games. And the thing that I pitched was, what if you're a Roomba, but you're a detective? And that's how Rumu came to be. It was like, here is a high-level idea. I just think that Roombas are cute and they're inherently really gamey, and pitched that to the team and they ran with it. I'm lucky to have a team at Robot House at the time who were really collaborative, so really intensely collaborative. So it starts with that, and then it's early prototyping. So I've actually tweeted a few things, you could probably go and find them, where it was like Rumu was a box in like a green box room pushing around other boxes, but that was kind of the early stages of Rumu. And then it went to, we hired a writer, so Daniel McMahon, who wrote stuff like LA Noire, who's pretty amazing. He also wrote Forza Horizon, which is big AAA games. And we asked him to come and write a sad vacuum game. And that was also very collaborative. Like, the thing about games is that it's this cross-section of so many different disciplines. So every step of the process, one of the things that is joyous but also very frustrating is that everyone kind of has to be consulted on every decision that's been made. It's not like, okay, this is what the character's going to look like. Okay, now moving on. It's like, oh, but how does that work with this mechanic? And also, if you're going to put this kind of shader on it, then we can't do this post-processing in this environment. So like, everyone has to work really closely together. And I think that's kind of what makes it such a rewarding experience when it's done. Thank you. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.